I'm not gonna lie, when I first saw the name of this game, Blender Bros, I thought it was going to be a game about a bunch of dude bros on the beach, mixing cocktails and trying to pick up all the women. Now thankfully, this game is not that, because that is a concept that makes me want to punch everyone involved in the face. Instead, we have a fairly bland, generic platformer. But now that I think of it, probably could have been improved by adding a minigame where you mix cocktails. The story, or what little of it there is you play this rabbit? He looks like a rabbit. We'll go with rabbit. This rabbit named Blender, who is some sort of space cop. Now go to all the planets and fix things. That's really it. They try to add a little bit more story with like dialogue between you and all the bosses, but it doesn't really ever enhance the plot or make the plot lead anywhere, because outside of like the starting conceit of the game, there is no plot. Although it should be noted the translation work in this game, because this game was very much translated. Oh boy, was it ever translated. Such as the description for your HQ, which claims it is the basement, I'm pretty sure he meant base, as well as constantly using terms that should probably have a space in them. I don't know who translated this game, but I'm really hoping they weren't paid a lot, because it shows. Now the core gameplay to Blender Bros is simple. You start out in one place in the world and you have to get to the exit. The exit is usually somewhere to the right of where you start, but not always. And because some of the levels, while very linear, are still kind of maze-like, if you don't understand a basic line, there is a radar function which allows you to see where you're supposed to go, as well as any mini-bros in the level. Speaking of the mini-bros, that's probably the one thing this game has that makes it really wholly unique, and even then they basically did this in Mega Man Zero, but okay. Essentially, the mini-bros are these little alien floating severed heads that give you a special ability each. Now, what each one does varies by type, and while these mini-bros exist to sort of give you a bunch of different strategic options as to how to conquer a level, because the levels are largely linear by design, they don't really ever help. In fact, there's only one you ever need to use to navigate the environment. Moreover, there's just one that is flat out better than the rest, because the one you start out with extends your attack range. I mean, that's okay, I guess. And there's one that you can use as a boat, there's one that'll give you a shield and stuff, as well as various other things like this. But very early on, you find one that gives you an extra health point. And this ability recharges relatively quickly, especially compared to other defensive-oriented mini-bros. So, flat out, this one is just straight up better than the rest, thus eliminating virtually any sort of strategy this game has. Now, similarly to the cyber elves in Mega Man Zero, you can evolve your mini-bros, but it's not entirely done in a linear fashion, which is what is confusing. Okay, let me explain. Say you start out with the one that gives you an extra piece of health back. By playing a specific LP for it, so it evolves, it will grow into another iteration of itself where it gives you the exact same effect, but it recharges even faster. And then you can evolve it again to do the exact same thing, but even faster. Now that actually makes logical sense. You start with one character, you grow it, it still does the same thing, but it gets better at it. What becomes less logical is when you take one guy that's like a defensive one, and somehow by evolving it, it becomes offensively oriented. And because you can't devolve them, unless this evolution is a marked improvement over its previous iteration, varying on your playstyle, you're basically screwed because you can't go back to the previous iteration. It's a really bizarre system that they implemented where you can enhance these guys, but their own abilities don't enhance, sometimes they just mutate into something completely different. Now beyond the platforming, there is also a Mode 7-ish mode. There's like 5 of these levels in the entire game. The idea is you want to race to the end of the track to disarm a bomb. However, on the way to the bomb, there's 4 disarming devices. You need to collect each of them to disarm the bomb. Now on paper this isn't necessarily a bad idea, but the hitboxes on the disarming devices are so small you have to basically hit them head on. So if you miss them, you have to stop, turn around, and go back to pick it up, because these courses aren't designed to be a circuit. They're more like a straight line. And all of this is entirely counterintuitive because the entire level is designed to be on a time limit, but everything in it is designed to make you go as slow as possible. It's really bizarre how these were designed. And weirdly enough, once you get used to it being a straight line type level, there is actually one you can run into that's basically an open course that you have to just sort of navigate and hope you figure out where everything is. So not only is it counterintuitive, it's also inconsistent with itself, which ultimately just makes it seem weird and almost forced that it's in here. Almost sort of like they saw the rest of their game, said, oh, we've got like 7 levels. That's not enough, we have to add more stuff to it. But they didn't really think about what they needed to do to expand on their game. And to wrap up gameplay, I guess I should talk about the bosses, because this game does in fact have them, and they are handled very clumsily. First and foremost, when you go into a boss fight, they'll typically give you a overview of exactly what you need to do to beat the boss, which, basically eliminating any difficulty aside, you can completely ignore all the advice they give you, just tank the damage and take out the boss entirely. I mean, case in point, I'm pretty sure I've shown that entire boss fight, oh what, like 3 times now? 4 maybe? You can do that with every boss except the last 2. The second last one because they fly, and the last one simply because they gave it exponentially more health, which is baffling as to why they did that, because while yes, it does make the final boss more difficult, it just creates a strange difficulty spike that doesn't exist anywhere else in the game because the rest of the game is incredibly easy. I mean, case in point for this game's lack of difficulty and length, in my initial 40-minute record of just getting some basic footage to start off this video, I beat the game. Like 100%. There's not a lot of challenge here except for the last boss, which feels like it's almost sort of cheating and trying to make up for the lack of difficulty everywhere else. The overall presentation of Blender Bros is average. All the visuals are suitable. I do like how it has a sort of Donkey Kong Country sort of feel with like 3D-ish models in a 2D environment. Really appreciate that. There's a very limited number of enemies in this game, very limited number of environments, and it doesn't feel like they went all that far in making this game look good. And honestly, same with the audio. I mean, every song in this game works, I guess, but none of it's all that particularly interesting or noteworthy or really all that good. And that's Blender Bros in a nutshell. It's a very average game that really tends to cost way more than it's worth. The cheapest one I'm seeing on eBay right now is like $45, and for a game of this quality, I can't honestly recommend it all that highly. But I have to give a big shout out and thank you to YouTube user NicoDemR for sending this to the show. And once again, there will be a link in the description to go check out what they're doing, so be sure to go check out their stuff and send them a big thanks from me. Ultimately, Blender Bros is a very average Game Boy Advance platformer. I could probably name a couple dozen others I would easily recommend over this one, especially at its current price. If, however, you've got all the Game Boy Advance games you wanted and you just want to play something different, it's not a bad game. It's certainly on the short side, and if that bothers you, you might want to give this one a pass, but it's certainly playable for all intents and purposes, just not all that particularly extraordinary.